The shotgun blast that killed Amanda Osborne's husband echoed through her nightmares for 3 years, and on this particular September evening in 1878, she sat at a stranger's supper table, trying not to think about blood on floorboards. Amanda hadn't wanted to come to Prescott, Arizona at all. Her friend Alice Owens had convinced her during a tearful conversation in Denver that maybe getting away from Colorado would help both of them heal. Alice had lost her own husband to consumption 2 winters back, and the 2 widows had formed a bond that felt stronger than blood. When Alice suggested they travel south to Arizona Territory, where Alice's cousin owned a boarding house and might have work for them, Amanda had agreed mostly because she didn't have the energy to refuse. The stagecoach ride had been brutal. 12 days of dust and heat and suspicious looks from the other passengers. 2 women traveling alone drew attention, and not always the welcome kind. They had arrived in Prescott 3 days ago, only to discover that Alice's cousin had sold the boarding house and moved to California 6 months prior. The new owner had no rooms available and no work to offer. They'd spent those 3 days burning through their small savings, staying at a hotel they couldn't afford, watching their money disappear like water in the desert. Amanda was 26 years old, and she felt ancient. Alice was 28, and the grief had carved lines around her eyes that made her look older. On this 3rd evening, they'd been sitting in the hotel lobby trying to figure out what to do next, when a rancher named Silas Hammond approached them. He was an older man, maybe 60, with kind eyes and calloused hands. He'd overheard their predicament and made an offer that seemed too good to be true. "My foreman needs help," Silas had said, hat in his weathered hands. "He's been running my ranch mostly alone since I took ill last spring. Good man, hard worker, but he cannot cook worth a damn, and the place has gone to pieces. I'm thinking he could use someone to help manage the household side of things. 2 someones, actually. I could offer room and board, plus wages. Nothing fancy, but honest work." Amanda and Alice had exchanged glances. They'd both heard stories about men in the West who made offers to desperate women. Offers that turned dark once you were miles from town with no way to escape. Silas must have seen their hesitation, because he'd smiled gently. "My wife Martha is there too. She'll vouch for the arrangement. And Reverend Bishop can tell you, I'm an honest man if you want to check. The ranch is just 5 miles outside town. You could ride out tomorrow, see the place, meet everyone. If it doesn't feel right, I'll bring you straight back to town, no questions asked." They'd taken him up on it, mostly because they were running out of options. Reverend Bishop had indeed confirmed that Silas Hammond was a man of his word, a widower himself who'd remarried 5 years back to a schoolteacher named Martha. The ride out to the ranch had been beautiful in a harsh way. The Arizona landscape was nothing like Colorado, all red rocks and scattered juniper, with mountains rising in the distance under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The ranch itself was modest but well maintained. A main house with a wide porch, a bunkhouse, a barn, and several corrals where horses moved like liquid in the afternoon heat. Martha Hammond had greeted them warmly, a stout woman in her 50s with flour on her apron and genuine kindness in her smile. She'd shown them around the house, explaining that she and Silas lived in the main house, but that she'd been struggling to keep up with everything since Silas's illness. He was recovering, she explained, but slowly, and he couldn't do the physical work he used to do. "Xavier is our foreman," Martha had said, as she led them toward the bunkhouse. "He came to us about 4 years ago. Best hand with horses I've ever seen, and he's kept this place running when Silas couldn't. But the poor man has been trying to do everything himself, and I can see it's wearing him down. He needs help, though he's too proud to ask for it." The bunkhouse was larger than Amanda expected, with several rooms off a main living area. Martha had explained that most of the ranch hands had left after Silas got sick, unable to pay them, leaving just Xavier to manage everything. "Xavier lives in the foreman's quarters at the back," Martha had said, "but there's a whole separate wing that's been sitting empty. 2 bedrooms, a shared sitting area. We thought you ladies could take that space, and you'd all share the main kitchen and dining area here in the bunkhouse. Xavier has been taking his meals at our house, but honestly, it would be easier for everyone if the bunkhouse was properly set up again." The space was dusty but solid, with real beds and windows that looked out toward the mountains. It was more room than Amanda had seen in years. The work would be managing the household side of things, Martha had continued. Cooking, cleaning, mending, that sort of thing. Xavier handles all the ranch work, the horses and cattle and repairs. We're hoping to hire more hands once we get back on our feet, but for now it's just him. He's been trying to do his own cooking and it's been a disaster. Man can rope a steer and break a wild horse, but he burns water. Alice had laughed at that, the first real laugh Amanda had heard from her in weeks. They'd agreed to stay for a trial period, at least through supper that evening, to see how everyone got along. Martha had headed back to the main house to tend to Silas, leaving Amanda and Alice to unpack their few belongings and try to make sense of their sudden change in fortune. "Do you think this is real?" Alice had whispered as they had shaken dust from the bedding. "Do you think it's actually this simple?" "Nothing is ever simple," Amanda had replied, but she'd felt a small flutter of something that might have been hope. They'd spent the afternoon cleaning the kitchen area and taking stock of the pantry. Someone had clearly tried to keep it supplied, but the organization was haphazard at best. Amanda found herself falling into the familiar rhythm of domestic work, something she'd done her whole life before Thomas died, before the violence and the blood and the 3 years of drifting that followed. As the sun started to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Alice had started pulling together ingredients for supper. They'd found potatoes and onions, dried beans that had been soaking, a haunch of venison hanging in the cold cellar, flour and lard for bread. It was good, honest food, and Amanda had felt her hands remember how to work as she'd helped Alice prepare the meal. They'd just started cooking when they'd heard boots on the porch outside, heavy, tired footsteps. The door had opened and a man had stepped inside, and Amanda's breath had caught in her throat. Xavier Garrett was not what she'd expected. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who worked hard every day of his life. His dark hair was overgrown, curling slightly at his collar, and he hadn't shaved in several days. His clothes were dusty from work, his boots worn, and there was a tiredness to him that seemed to go bone deep. But it was his eyes that struck her, dark brown, almost black, and filled with a sorrow so profound it was like looking into a mirror. He'd stopped short when he saw them, clearly surprised. "Madam," he'd said, nodding to Alice, then to Amanda. His voice was deep, rough from disuse. "Madams, you must be Xavier," Alice had said, stepping forward with her natural warmth. "I'm Alice Owens, and this is Amanda Osborne. Mr. Hammond hired us to help around the place. We're making supper. I hope you're hungry." Xavier had stood there for a long moment, and Amanda had seen him struggle with something internal. Finally, he'd nodded slowly. "Obliged," he'd said. "Let me wash up." He'd disappeared into the back rooms, and Alice had turned to Amanda with wide eyes. "He's young," she'd whispered. "I was expecting someone older." Amanda had nodded. Xavier couldn't be more than 30, maybe 32 at most. Young to be foreman of a ranch, even a small one. He'd returned a few minutes later, face washed, hair damp where he'd tried to slap the dust out of it. He'd changed into a clean shirt, which Amanda noted with approval. At least he made an effort. The table in the main room was solid oak, scarred from use but sturdy. Amanda and Alice had set it with mismatched plates and cups they'd found in the kitchen, along with the food they'd prepared. It wasn't fancy, but it was wholesome, and there was plenty of it. Xavier had stood at the edge of the room, looking uncomfortable, as if he wasn't sure what to do in his own space. "Please sit down," Amanda had heard herself say. "You must be tired." He'd sat, moving carefully, as if he was afraid of breaking something. Amanda and Alice had sat as well, Alice on one side of the table, Amanda on the other, with Xavier at the head. For a long moment, no one had moved. The food sat steaming between them, the bread fresh from the oven, the venison tender and fragrant, the beans seasoned with onion, and a touch of molasses they had found in the pantry. Xavier had stared at the food as if he'd never seen a proper meal before. His hands rested on the table, work roughened and scarred, and Amanda noticed he was gripping the edge as if he needed to hold on to something solid. "Would you like to say grace?" Alice had asked gently. Xavier had shaken his head. "I'm not much for praying these days," he'd said, his voice rough. "But you ladies go ahead if you're inclined." Alice had offered a simple blessing, thanking God for the food and for new friends. When she'd finished, Amanda had reached for the bread basket, intending to pass it to Alice, but Xavier had reached for it at the same time. Their hands had brushed, and Amanda had felt a jolt of something she couldn't name. Xavier had pulled back as if burned, and for a moment their eyes had met across the table. Then Xavier had done something that changed everything. He'd taken the bread basket from the center of the table and held it out, first to Alice, then to Amanda. And as he'd offered it to Amanda, the smallest smile had touched his lips. It was barely there, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his entire face. The sorrow was still there in his eyes, but for just that moment, there was something else too. Something warm and human and alive. "Thank you for this," he'd said quietly. "It's been a long time since anyone cooked for me, since anyone." He'd trailed off, the smile fading, but Amanda had seen it. That brief flash of something other than grief. Amanda had taken a piece of bread, her heart beating harder than it should. "You're welcome," she'd managed to say. They'd eaten in relative silence, though it wasn't uncomfortable. Xavier had worked his way through 2 full plates of food, eating with the focused intensity of someone who'd been forgetting to feed himself properly. Alice had made conversation about the ranch, asking gentle questions about the horses and the land, and Xavier had answered in short sentences, his voice growing a bit warmer as he talked about the animals. Amanda had mostly listened, watching Xavier when she thought he wasn't looking. There was something about him that called to the broken places inside her, the way he moved carefully, as if he was afraid of taking up too much space, the way his eyes went distant sometimes, as if he was seeing something far away, the way his hands trembled slightly when he reached for his water cup. She recognized it all because she saw it in herself every morning in the mirror. After supper, Xavier had helped clear the table without being asked, which surprised both women. He'd carried dishes to the kitchen and then stood awkwardly, clearly wanting to help, but not knowing how. "We've got this," Alice had assured him. "You've had a long day. Get some rest." Xavier had nodded, thanked them again, and disappeared into his quarters. Amanda and Alice had washed dishes in quiet, both processing the evening. "He's hurting," Alice had finally said. "That man is carrying something heavy." "Yes," Amanda had agreed softly. "He is." "Martha said he came here 4 years ago," Alice had continued. "Wonder what happened before that." Amanda had wondered the same thing, but she hadn't said so. Instead, she'd finished drying the last plate and hung up the towel, trying not to think about the way Xavier's smile had made her feel something she'd thought was dead inside her. That night, lying in her new bed in the bunkhouse, listening to the desert sounds outside her window, Amanda had stared at the ceiling and admitted to herself that she was in trouble. She hadn't felt anything for another person since Thomas died, hadn't wanted to. The grief and guilt had wrapped around her heart like barbed wire, keeping everything else out. But that small smile, that brief moment of human connection across a supper table, had found a crack in her armor. And Amanda wasn't sure whether to be grateful or terrified. In his room at the back of the bunkhouse, Xavier lay awake as well, staring at the darkness and wondering what the hell had just happened to him. He'd been numb for so long, going through the motions of life without really living, working himself to exhaustion every day just so he could sleep at night without dreaming. But when he'd walked into the bunkhouse and smelled real cooking, when he'd seen 2 women working in the kitchen like it was the most natural thing in the world, something inside him had cracked open. And when he'd passed the bread to the dark-haired woman, Amanda, and seen the sorrow in her green eyes that matched his own, he'd smiled. He hadn't smiled in 4 years. Not since the day he'd buried his wife and infant son and left Texas behind, running from a grief so big it had nearly killed him. Xavier pressed his palms against his eyes and tried to will himself back to the numbness. It was safer there, easier. He couldn't survive losing anyone else, so the solution was simple. Don't let anyone in, but it was too late. The door was already open, just a crack, and light was starting to seep through. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only the high desert could provide. Amanda woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of Alice moving around in the next room. For a moment, she forgot where she was, her heart pounding with the old panic that always came when she woke somewhere unfamiliar. Then memory caught up with her, and she breathed slowly until her heartbeat steadied. She dressed in one of her 2 work dresses, a faded blue cotton that had seen better days, and pinned her dark hair into a practical bun. When she emerged into the sitting area, Alice was already dressed, her blonde hair neatly braided. "Morning," Alice said with a smile. "I heard Xavier leave about an hour ago. Man rises with the sun, apparently." They made their way to the kitchen and started preparing breakfast. Amanda mixed batter for flapjacks while Alice fried bacon and started coffee. The domestic rhythm felt good, purposeful, and Amanda found herself relaxing into it. They had just finished cooking when the door opened and Xavier stepped inside. He looked like he'd been working for hours already. his shirt damp with sweat despite the early hour, dirt on his pants from mucking out stalls or whatever else needed doing. "Morning," he said, pulling off his hat. His hair was damp with sweat, curling slightly, and Amanda noticed he'd shaved. His face was lean and angular, with a strong jaw, and those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. "Good morning," Alice said cheerfully. "Perfect timing. Breakfast is ready." They sat at the same table, the three of them, and this time the silence was a bit less heavy. Xavier ate like he was starving, which he probably was, and Alice kept up a gentle stream of conversation about the chickens she'd noticed near the barn and whether anyone was tending them. "They mostly fend for themselves," Xavier admitted. "I throw them scratch when I remember, but Martha's the one who usually collects the eggs." "We can take that over," Alice offered. "Give Martha one less thing to worry about." Xavier nodded, then looked up at Amanda. Their eyes met and held for a moment before he looked away. "You settling in all right?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Yes," Amanda said. "The rooms are comfortable. Thank you." "Not my doing," Xavier said. "You should thank the Hammonds." "We will," Amanda said. "But you could have made this difficult. You're being kind." Xavier looked uncomfortable with the word kind. He shook his head. "Just makes sense to have help. Place has been falling apart without it." After breakfast, Xavier headed back out to work, and Alice went to find Martha to discuss the daily routine. Amanda found herself alone in the kitchen, washing dishes and thinking about the man who just left. There was so much she didn't know about him, where he'd come from, what had happened to put that sorrow in his eyes, why a man who was clearly skilled and capable was working as a foreman on a small ranch in Arizona instead of running his own place. But she recognized the signs of someone who was running from something. She'd been running herself for 3 years. The days began to settle into a pattern. Amanda and Alice managed the household, cooking 3 meals a day, keeping the bunkhouse clean, tending the chickens, helping Martha with the garden, and the preserving that needed doing before winter came. Xavier worked from sunup to sundown, repairing fences, tending the horses, managing the small herd of cattle, fixing whatever broke. They ate together 3 times a day at that oak table, and slowly, gradually, Xavier began to thaw. It started with single-word answers, becoming full sentences. Then he began offering information without being asked, talking about the ranch, the animals, the land. He had a quiet sense of humor that emerged in unexpected moments, dry observations that made Alice laugh, and brought small smiles to Amanda's face. Amanda found herself watching for those smiles. Xavier didn't offer them often, but when he did, they transformed him. She noticed other things too. The way he was always careful to wipe his boots before coming inside, respecting their work. The way he thanked them after every meal, his gratitude genuine. The way he'd started lingering a bit after supper, sitting with them while they had coffee, talking about nothing in particular. She noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't watching, quick glances that he pulled away from when she met his eyes. 3 weeks passed in this careful dance. The September heat gave way to October cool, and the aspens up in the mountains turned gold. Amanda and Alice had fully moved into the rhythm of ranch life, and Amanda realized one morning that she felt more at peace than she had in years. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Martha invited them all to the main house for supper. "Silas wants to thank you properly," she said. "He's feeling much better, and he wants to celebrate having a functioning ranch again." That evening, Amanda dressed in her better dress, a green cotton that brought out her eyes. She told herself it wasn't because Xavier would be there, but she knew she was lying. The supper at the main house was warm and boisterous. Silas Hammond was indeed much recovered, a robust man with a booming laugh and endless stories about the old days. He toasted Xavier, calling him the finest foreman in the territory, and thanked Amanda and Alice for bringing life back to the ranch. "You've done more than cook and clean," Silas said, his eyes twinkling. "You've reminded us what a home feels like. Even Xavier here seems lighter. Man's been working himself to death since I got sick. Good to see him smile again." Amanda glanced at Xavier and saw color rise in his cheeks. He ducked his head, uncomfortable with the praise, but when he looked up, his eyes found hers across the table. Something passed between them, unspoken but profound. After supper, Martha brought out a fiddle and insisted Silas play. He protested that he was rusty, but Martha wouldn't hear it. Soon the main room was filled with music, lively reels that made Alice clap along. "Dance with me, wife," Silas said, pulling Martha to her feet. They moved around the room with the easy grace of people who had danced together for years. Alice laughed and began dancing on her own, swaying to the music with her eyes closed, lost in the moment. Amanda sat watching, her foot tapping, but she didn't get up. She'd loved dancing once before. Thomas had been a wonderful dancer, light on his feet despite his size. They'd danced at their wedding, at barn dances, in their own kitchen when the mood struck him. The memory was bittersweet. She felt someone sit down beside her and turned to find Xavier there. He wasn't looking at her, his eyes on the dancers, but his presence felt intentional. "You don't dance?" he asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the music. "Not anymore," Amanda said. "You?" "Used to," Xavier said. "Long time ago." They sat in companionable silence, watching the others, and Amanda was intensely aware of how close he was. His shoulder nearly touched hers. She could smell the soap he'd used when he'd washed up for supper, clean and simple. "Can I ask you something?" Xavier said suddenly. Amanda's heart skipped. "Yes." "Your husband," Xavier said carefully. "How long has it been?" 3 years, Amanda said. "He was shot. There was a robbery at the store he managed. He tried to stop them." Xavier nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." "Thank you," Amanda said. Then, gathering her courage, "Can I ask you something?" Xavier tensed but nodded. "You said you used to dance, used to smile. What happened?" For a long moment, Xavier didn't answer. Amanda thought maybe she'd pushed too hard, crossed a line. But then he spoke, his voice low and raw. "I had a wife, Rebecca, and a son. He was only 3 months old. We were living in Texas, trying to make a go of a small ranch. There was a fever that went through our area. Lots of folks got sick. Rebecca and the baby both caught it." He paused, swallowed hard. "I sat with them for a week, watching them suffer, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. They died within hours of each other. I buried them on a hillside overlooking our land, and then I left. Couldn't stay there. Couldn't stand to look at that hillside every day." Amanda felt tears sting her eyes. "Xavier, I'm so sorry." "That was 4 years ago," Xavier continued. "I drifted for a while, working ranch to ranch, until I ended up here. Silas took a chance on me when I was pretty rough around the edges. Gave me work and purpose when I needed it. But I haven't let myself feel much of anything since then. Seems safer that way." "I know what you mean," Amanda said softly. "After Thomas died, I was angry for a long time. Angry at him for trying to be a hero. Angry at God for letting it happen. Angry at myself for not being there. Then the anger faded and there was just emptiness. I went through the motions, but I wasn't really alive. Just existing." Xavier turned to look at her then. Really look at her. And Amanda saw her own pain reflected in his eyes. "What changed?" he asked. Amanda considered the question. "I'm not sure anything did, really. Alice convinced me to come here, and I went along because I didn't have the energy to argue. I didn't expect to feel anything ever again." She paused, her heart beating hard. "But then I sat at your table, and you smiled when you passed the bread, and something woke up inside me. Something I thought was dead." Xavier's breath caught. "Amanda," he said, her name rough on his tongue. "I'm scared," Amanda admitted. "I'm terrified, actually, because I don't know if I can survive losing someone again. I don't know if I'm strong enough." "I'm scared too," Xavier said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and his fingers trembled slightly. "I've been telling myself to stay numb, to not let anyone in. But you walked into my bunkhouse with your sad eyes and your kind hands, and you made me feel things I thought I'd never feel again." Amanda's tears spilled over. "What do we do?" "I don't know," Xavier said honestly. "But maybe we figure it out together. Maybe 2 broken people can help each other heal." Amanda nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Xavier squeezed her hand gently, and they sat there together, hands clasped, while the music played around them and the others danced. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even a promise. But it was a beginning, fragile and tentative. And for the first time in 3 years, Amanda felt genuinely hopeful about the future. The evening wound down eventually. Silas's fingers grew tired, and he set aside the fiddle. Martha served coffee and apple pie, and the conversation turned to plans for the ranch. Silas wanted to hire on more hands come spring, expand the horse operation. Xavier discussed breeds and training methods, his knowledge evident in every word. Alice caught Amanda's eye and raised her eyebrows slightly, a silent question. Amanda gave a small nod, and Alice smiled, understanding passing between the two women who'd become as close as sisters. When Amanda and Alice finally walked back to the bunkhouse with Xavier, the night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Xavier walked between them, but his hand brushed Amanda's several times, small touches that felt deliberate. At the bunkhouse door, Alice excused herself quickly, heading inside and giving them a moment alone. Xavier stood on the porch, hat in his hands, looking uncertain. "Thank you," he said finally, "for listening, for understanding. I haven't talked about them in 4 years, haven't even said their names out loud." "Rebecca," Amanda said softly, "and your son. What was his name?" "Jacob," Xavier said, his voice breaking slightly. "His name was Jacob." "They were lucky to have you," Amanda said, "even for the short time they did." Xavier nodded, his jaw tight with emotion. "Thomas was lucky to have you too." They stood there for a long moment, the desert night cold around them, neither wanting to be the first to go inside and end the moment. Finally, Xavier spoke. "Can I ask you something else? Anything. Would you take a walk with me tomorrow, after supper? There's a place I'd like to show you, if you want." Amanda's heart soared. "I'd like that very much." Xavier smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Good night, Amanda." "Good night, Xavier." Amanda went inside, feeling lighter than air. Alice was waiting in the sitting room, practically vibrating with curiosity. "Well," Alice demanded. "He asked me to take a walk with him tomorrow," Amanda said, unable to keep the smile off her face. Alice squealed and pulled Amanda into a hug. "I knew it! I've seen the way he looks at you. The man is smitten." "It's too soon," Amanda protested, but without much conviction. "We barely know each other." "Sometimes the heart knows before the head catches up," Alice said wisely. "And you deserve happiness, Amanda. After everything you've been through, you deserve to feel alive again." That night, Amanda lay in bed, thinking about Xavier's hand in hers, his voice rough with emotion as he spoke about his lost family, the smile that transformed his whole face. She thought about how strange it was that two people carrying such heavy grief could find each other in the middle of the Arizona desert. How unlikely and precious it felt. She thought about the walk tomorrow and felt nervous anticipation flutter in her stomach. It was terrifying to open her heart again. But Xavier was right. Maybe two broken people could help each other heal. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Amanda went through her chores in a daze, her mind constantly wandering to the evening ahead. Alice teased her mercilessly but kindly, and even helped her change into her better dress after supper. Xavier appeared at the door just as the sun was starting to set, dressed in clean clothes, his hair combed, nervous energy radiating from him. "Ready?" he asked. Amanda nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. They walked away from the bunkhouse, toward the eastern edge of the property where the land began to rise into foothills. Xavier didn't speak much, but his presence was comfortable. When the path grew rocky, he offered his hand to help her, and afterward, he didn't let go. They climbed a gentle rise and emerged onto a flat outcropping that looked out over the valley. The ranch was spread below them, the buildings small in the distance. Beyond that, the desert stretched away in shades of red and gold, and mountains rose purple against the darkening sky. "This is where I come when I need to think," Xavier said. "When the grief gets too heavy. There's something about seeing how big the world is that makes my problems feel smaller. Not gone, but manageable." "It's beautiful," Amanda breathed. They sat on the smooth rock, shoulders touching, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Pink and orange and deep crimson, the light gilding everything it touched. "I meant what I said last night," Xavier said after a while. "About being scared. I am. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life alone, keeping everyone at arm's length, never letting myself feel anything again." "Me too," Amanda admitted. "I've been so careful for 3 years. Built walls so high I thought nothing could get through them, but somehow you did." Xavier turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "I don't know how to do this, Don't know the right words or the right moves. It's been so long since I courted anyone. Rebecca and I grew up together, knew each other our whole lives. This is different." "It is different," Amanda agreed. "We're different people than we were before. Older, sadder, more cautious. But maybe that's all right. Maybe we don't have to rush. We can take our time, figure it out as we go." "I'd like that," Xavier said. He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "I'd like to court you properly, Amanda Osborne. Take you on walks, talk with you, get to know everything about you. Would that be all right?" Amanda felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "Yes," she whispered. "That would be very all right." Xavier's smile was slow and sweet, transforming his face. "Good," he said. Then, after a pause, "Can I kiss you?" Amanda's breath caught. It had been so long since anyone had kissed her, since she'd wanted anyone to kiss her. But looking at Xavier's earnest face, his dark eyes full of hope and fear and longing, she knew she wanted this. "Yes," she said. Xavier leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, but Amanda didn't want to. His lips met hers gently, tentatively, a question more than a statement. Amanda kissed him back, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, where she could feel his heart pounding. The kiss was sweet and careful, full of promise and possibility. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I haven't kissed anyone since Rebecca," he admitted. "I was afraid I'd forgotten how." Amanda laughed, a real laugh full of joy. "You remember just fine." They sat on that rock until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing. Xavier told her about growing up in Texas, about his parents who died when he was young, about learning to work with horses from an old vaquero who'd taken him under his wing. Amanda told him about her childhood in Missouri, about meeting Thomas at a church social when she was 19, about the dreams they'd had for their future that had died with him. It was full dark by the time they walked back to the bunkhouse, hand in hand, and Amanda felt like she was floating. At the door, Xavier kissed her again, longer this time, his hands gentle on her waist. "Good night," he murmured against her lips. "Good night," Amanda whispered back. Inside, Alice was waiting with an expectant look, and Amanda told her everything, the two women talking late into the night, like young girls with their first beaux. Over the following weeks, Amanda and Xavier's courtship deepened. They took walks every evening, exploring the ranch land and the surrounding desert. Xavier showed her his favorite places, a grove of cottonwoods along a dry wash, a spring that bubbled up from rocks and created a tiny oasis of green, a vista where you could see 3 mountain ranges at once. They talked endlessly, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Xavier told her about his lost family, and Amanda listened, holding his hand while he grieved aloud for the first time in years. Amanda told him about the nightmares she still had, about the guilt she carried for not being there when Thomas died, and Xavier held her while she cried. But it wasn't all sadness. They laughed too, discovering shared humor and small joys. Xavier had a gift for finding beauty in ordinary things, pointing out the way light hit the rocks or the pattern of bird flight overhead. Amanda challenged him to think about the future, not just survive day to day. They kissed often, learning each other, the passion between them growing, but always tempered with respect and care. Xavier never pushed for more, content to go slow, to build something solid. Alice watched their romance bloom with happiness and perhaps a touch of wistfulness. She'd loved her husband deeply, and his loss had left her adrift. But she found purpose in the ranch work and genuine friendship with Martha Hammond. The older woman treated Alice like a daughter, teaching her about desert plants and preserving techniques. As October turned to November, the weather cooled, and Xavier began talking about the future. He approached Silas one evening and asked if there might be a way to build a small house on the property, something separate from the bunkhouse. "Planning to make this permanent?" Silas asked with a knowing smile. "If Amanda will have me," Xavier admitted, "but I want to have something to offer her first, not just a room in a bunkhouse." "Son, you've made this ranch profitable again," Silas said. "You've earned a partnership as far as I'm concerned. We'll build you a house, and we'll talk about making you a part owner of this operation. You've more than earned it." Xavier had been stunned. The conversation had evolved into serious discussion about the future of the ranch, about expanding the operation, about building something lasting. By the end, they'd shaken hands on a deal that made Xavier a 25% partner, with the expectation that he'd continue managing the daily operations. Xavier had gone straight to Amanda and told her everything, his excitement barely contained. "I know it's soon," he'd said. "I know we've only been courting for 6 weeks, but I don't want to wait, Amanda. I've already wasted 4 years being half alive. I don't want to waste another day." Amanda had felt her heart swell. "What are you saying?" Xavier had dropped to one knee right there on the bunkhouse porch, taking her hands in his. "Amanda Osborne, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. I promise I'll honor Thomas's memory and never ask you to forget him. I promise I'll give you a home and a family and all the love I have in me. Will you marry me?" Amanda had pulled him to his feet and kissed him hard. "Yes," she'd said against his lips. "Yes, yes, yes." They'd told Alice and the Hammonds that night, and there had been celebration and tears and joy. Martha had immediately started planning a Christmas wedding, insisting they needed time to do it right. Alice had hugged Amanda tight and whispered, "I'm so happy for you." "You'll stay, won't you?" Amanda had asked anxiously. "Even after Xavier and I marry, you'll stay here at the ranch?" "If you'll have me," Alice had said. "This feels like home now. You and Xavier and the Hammonds, this ranch. I'm not ready to leave." "Then don't," Amanda had said. "This is your home too, for as long as you want it." The weeks leading up to Christmas were busy and joyful. Xavier and Silas, with help from hired men from town, began building a small house on a pretty spot near the Cottonwood Grove. It was modest but well made, with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room, and a wide porch that faced the mountains. Amanda and Alice spent hours sewing, making curtains and quilts and a wedding dress from fabric Martha insisted on buying. Amanda's dress was simple but beautiful, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs that Alice worked late into the night completing. Xavier courted Amanda properly through it all. They chaperoned themselves mostly, with Alice often joining their evening walks, though she'd discreetly wander off to give them time alone. Xavier was affectionate but respectful, his kisses passionate but his hands always appropriate. He did small things that made Amanda fall deeper in love with him every day. He brought her wildflowers, even though it was late in the season and flowers were scarce. He learned to help with dishes after supper, so they could have more time to talk. He listened when she spoke, really listened, remembering small details and bringing them up later. Amanda watched Xavier heal as the weeks passed. The deep sorrow in his eyes began to lift, replaced by genuine happiness. He laughed more, smiled more, became more himself. He still had bad days when the grief caught up with him, but Amanda was there for those, holding him and letting him feel without judgment. She was healing too. The nightmares about Thomas's death came less frequently. The guilt began to ease as she allowed herself to be happy again. She'd worried that falling in love with Xavier was somehow betraying Thomas's memory, but she came to understand that Thomas would have wanted her to live, to love, to be happy. One evening in early December, as they walked under a sky full of stars, Amanda told Xavier about this realization. "I think Thomas would have liked you," she said. "He always said life was too short to waste on being miserable. He'd want me to grab happiness where I could find it." Xavier had pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Rebecca would have liked you too. She'd be glad I found someone to live for again. She always said I loved too hard, felt too deep. She'd be happy knowing I opened my heart again." The wedding was set for December 23rd, just before Christmas. Reverend Bishop would perform the ceremony at the ranch, and half the town of Prescott was invited. Martha was in her element organizing everything, and the ranch buzzed with activity and anticipation. 3 days before the wedding, a storm rolled in, bringing cold rain and even a bit of snow to the higher elevations. Amanda stood on the bunkhouse porch watching the rain when Xavier appeared beside her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, though his tone was teasing. "Not even slightly," Amanda assured him. She leaned into his warmth. "Are you?" "Only about whether I deserve this much happiness," Xavier admitted. "Feels almost wrong to be this content after so much sadness." Amanda turned to face him, cupping his face in her hands. You deserve every bit of happiness you can find, Xavier Garrett, and so do I. We paid our dues in grief. Now we get to live. Xavier kissed her deeply, the rain falling around them, and Amanda felt the last pieces of her broken heart knit back together. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the desert air crisp and perfect. The ranch house had been decorated with pine boughs and ribbons, and Martha had outdone herself preparing food. Neighbors and friends from town arrived throughout the morning, and the ranch filled with laughter and music. Amanda dressed in her wedding gown with Alice's help, her hands shaking with nerves and excitement. Alice arranged Amanda's dark hair in an elegant style, weaving in small white flowers she'd somehow managed to obtain. "You look beautiful," Alice said, tears in her eyes. "Thomas would be so proud of you. And Xavier is the luckiest man alive." "Thank you," Amanda whispered, hugging her friend tight. "Thank you for convincing me to come here. Thank you for being my family." "Always," Alice promised. The ceremony took place in the main room of the ranch house, with Reverend Bishop officiating. Silas gave Amanda away, and Martha stood beside her as matron of honor. Xavier stood at the front, looking devastatingly handsome in new clothes, his dark eyes locked on Amanda as she walked toward him. When she reached his side, Xavier took her hands and Amanda could feel him trembling. But his voice was steady as they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other for all their days. "I, Xavier, take you, Amanda, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Xavier said clearly. "I promise to love you through joy and sorrow, through good times and hard times. I promise to honor the memory of those we've lost, while building a future together. I promise to make you smile every day and hold you through every tear. From this day forward, you are my home and my heart." Amanda's voice shook as she made her own vows. "I, Amanda, take you, Xavier, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you with all that I am and all that I have. I promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings. I promise to honor your past while building our future. You've made me believe in happiness again, and I will spend my life trying to give you the same gift." Reverend Bishop pronounced them husband and wife, and when Xavier kissed her, the whole room erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was joyous and long. There was music and dancing, and this time Amanda danced, swept around the floor by her new husband, while their friends and neighbors clapped along. Xavier was a better dancer than she'd expected, and he held her close, whispering in her ear about how beautiful she was, how happy he felt, how he couldn't believe she was really his. Silas made a toast, calling Xavier the son he'd never had, and welcoming Amanda to the family. Martha cried happy tears and hugged them both. Alice caught the bouquet when Amanda threw it, and everyone laughed and speculated about whether there might be another wedding in the future. As the sun set, Xavier and Amanda slipped away to their new house, finally alone. Inside, candles were lit and a fire burned in the hearth. Someone, probably Martha and Alice, had prepared everything beautifully, with flowers on the table and the bed made up with fresh linens. Xavier closed the door behind them and leaned against it, just looking at Amanda with wonder in his eyes. "My wife," he said softly. "You're really my wife. And you're my husband," Amanda said, moving into his arms. Finally. That night, they made love for the first time, gentle and passionate, learning each other's bodies with reverent touches. Xavier was careful with her, asking permission at every step, making sure she was comfortable and wanted this. Amanda had been nervous, but Xavier's tenderness made her feel safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, listening to the desert night sounds and talked about their future. They wanted children, both of them, though the thought was bittersweet given what they'd each lost. They wanted to grow old together on this ranch, building something lasting. They wanted to honor their first marriages while fully embracing this second chance at love. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Xavier murmured, his hand stroking Amanda's hair. "Never thought I'd want to wake up in the morning, excited for the day ahead. You gave that back to me." "You gave it back to me, too," Amanda said. She propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at his face in the candlelight. "We healed each other, Xavier. That's what love does. It doesn't erase the past or take away the pain, but it makes the present worth living and the future worth planning for." Xavier pulled her down for a kiss, deep and full of promise, and Amanda knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The winter passed in quiet contentment. Amanda and Xavier settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They'd each been married before, knew the rhythms of sharing space with another person, and they fell into comfortable patterns quickly. Mornings started early, with Xavier heading out to work and Amanda making breakfast. He'd come back to the house for the midday meal, and they'd eat together, talking about the ranch, the horses, their plans. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading or talking, or simply being together in comfortable silence. The physical intimacy between them deepened as they grew more comfortable with each other. Xavier was an attentive and passionate lover, and Amanda discovered she'd been awakened in ways she hadn't expected. The joy they found in each other's arms was healing in its own right, a celebration of being alive and together. Alice remained in the bunkhouse and continued managing the household there. She'd become indispensable to Martha, and the two women were developing plans to start a small business selling preserves and baked goods in town. Alice seemed content, though Amanda sometimes caught a wistful look in her friend's eyes when she watched Amanda and Xavier together. In February, Amanda began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be sure before telling Xavier, wanting to be certain and also terrified of how he might react, given his tragic loss of his infant son. One evening in March, as they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, Amanda took Xavier's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I have something to tell you," she said quietly. Xavier looked at her, his expression questioning. Then understanding dawned and his eyes went wide. "Amanda, are you saying—" "I'm fairly certain I'm with child," Amanda said. "About 3 months along, I think." Xavier's face went through a series of emotions. Joy, fear, hope, terror. His hand trembled against her stomach. "A baby," he whispered. "I know you're scared," Amanda said quickly. "I'm scared too. After what happened with Jacob, I understand if you're terrified. But Xavier, I believe this is meant to be. I believe this is part of our healing, part of our future together." Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and Amanda felt his tears soak into her shoulder. "I'm so scared," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I'm so scared of losing you both." "I know," Amanda soothed, stroking his back. "But we can't live in fear of what might happen. We have to have faith. We have to believe that this time will be different." Xavier pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. "I love you so much," he said fiercely. "And I already love this baby. I'm terrified, but I'm also so damn happy I can barely breathe." They told the Hammonds and Alice the next day, and the ranch erupted in joy. Martha immediately went into protective mode, insisting Amanda shouldn't overwork herself. Silas started planning additions to the house, talking about nurseries and children running around the ranch. Alice cried happy tears and hugged Amanda tight, thrilled to become an aunt of sorts. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Amanda felt well, just tired and occasionally queasy in the early months. Xavier hovered constantly, his protectiveness endearing even when it bordered on excessive. He insisted on helping with everything, not wanting her to strain herself. At night, he'd talk to her belly, telling their unborn child stories and making promises about the future. As Amanda's belly grew, so did Xavier's confidence that maybe this time things would be all right. He started building a cradle in the evenings, his hands careful as he worked the wood smooth. He talked about teaching their child to ride, to work with horses, to love this desert land. In late September, nearly a year after that first supper, when Xavier had smiled for the first time, Amanda went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Xavier stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement even as his own fear threatened to overwhelm him. Martha and Alice both attended the birth, experienced and calm, and finally, as the sun set on the second day, Amanda gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The moment they placed the infant in Xavier's arms, he broke down completely. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at his son, this tiny, perfect human that he and Amanda had created together. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were deep blue like Amanda's. "He's beautiful," Xavier choked out. "He's perfect. Amanda, we have a son." Amanda, exhausted but radiant, smiled up at her husband. "What should we name him?" Xavier thought for a long moment, his finger gently stroking his son's cheek. "I'd like to call him Thomas," he said finally, "after your first husband, if that's all right with you." Fresh tears spilled down Amanda's cheeks. "Thomas Jacob," she said, "after both the men who came before him, both the fathers who should be here but aren't." "Thomas Jacob Garrett," Xavier agreed. He leaned down, careful of the baby, and kissed Amanda deeply. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "Thank you for this. Thank you for giving me a future worth living." Little Thomas was a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed to find the world endlessly fascinating. Xavier was a devoted father, hands-on in ways that surprised everyone. He changed diapers and walked the floor when the baby was fussy, sang lullabies in a surprisingly good voice, and spent hours just staring at his son with wonder in his eyes. Amanda recovered well from the birth and threw herself into motherhood with joy. The fear she'd carried throughout the pregnancy eased as Thomas thrived, growing strong and healthy. Watching Xavier with their son healed something deep inside both of them, a final piece of grief letting go. Alice doted on Thomas, declaring herself the favorite aunt even though there was no competition. She'd spend hours holding the baby, singing to him, telling him stories. Martha and Silas were equally besotted, and the ranch house rang with the sounds of a baby's laughter and coos. The year turned, bringing them to the autumn of 1879. Thomas learned to crawl, then to pull himself up on furniture. His first word was "Papa," and Xavier had promptly burst into tears of joy. The ranch prospered, with Xavier and Silas expanding the horse operation and hiring on 3 permanent hands. The small ranch was becoming a real operation. In November, on a cool evening with the first hints of winter in the air, the extended ranch family gathered at Xavier and Amanda's house for supper. It had become tradition, these Sunday suppers, where everyone came together. Tonight it was Alice and the Hammonds, plus the 3 ranch hands who'd become part of the family. They sat around the table Xavier had built, now expanded to seat 8, passing food and sharing stories. Thomas sat in a high chair between Amanda and Xavier, babbling happily and smearing food everywhere. The room was warm and full of laughter, and Amanda looked around at all these people she loved and felt overwhelming gratitude. After supper, when the others had left and Thomas was asleep in his cradle, Amanda and Xavier sat on their porch wrapped in a blanket. The desert night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. "Do you remember a year ago?" Amanda asked softly. "That first supper when we met?" "Of course," Xavier said. "I remember thinking you were the saddest person I'd ever seen, and I remember passing you the bread and smiling for the first time in 4 years. That smile felt like coming back to life." "It was the beginning of everything," Amanda agreed. 2 broken people who found each other in the middle of the desert, who decided to try to heal together. Xavier kissed her temple. "Best decision I ever made. You saved my life, Amanda. You and Thomas both. You gave me a reason to live again, to hope again, to love again. You did the same for me," Amanda said. She turned to look up at her husband, this man she loved more than she'd thought possible. "We've built something beautiful here, Xavier. A home, a family, a future. We honored our pasts while creating something new." "I want more," Xavier said suddenly. "More children, more years, more of this life with you. I want to grow old on this ranch, surrounded by our grandchildren someday. I want to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy." "Then that's what we'll do," Amanda promised. She kissed him deeply, tasting love and promise and future on his lips. Over the next several years, the Garrett family continued to grow and thrive. Amanda and Xavier had 3 more children, a daughter they named Rebecca Alice, born in 1881, who had her father's dark eyes and her mother's gentle nature. Twin boys born in 1883, whom they named James and Samuel, who were hellions from birth and kept everyone on their toes. The ranch expanded significantly. Xavier's partnership with Silas proved immensely successful, and the Garrett Hammond Ranch became known throughout Arizona Territory for breeding exceptional horses. They employed a dozen hands at peak season, and the small house Xavier had built grew with additions until it was a proper ranch house. Alice eventually remarried, though not until 1882. She'd met a widower named Robert Mills, a doctor who'd come to Prescott from back east. He was a kind man, patient with Alice's grief, and their courtship was slow and careful. Amanda and Xavier stood up for them at their wedding, and Robert built a house in town where he could practice medicine. Alice remained close to the ranch family, visiting often and maintaining her deep friendship with Amanda and Martha. Silas's health remained stable for several more years, and he got to know all of Xavier and Amanda's children. He passed peacefully in his sleep in 1885, leaving his portion of the ranch equally divided between Martha, Xavier, and Amanda. Martha continued living in the main house, surrounded by the grandchildren she'd never had by blood, but claimed by love. As Arizona Territory moved toward statehood, the Garrett Ranch adapted and grew. Xavier proved to have a sharp business mind to go along with his skill with horses, and he navigated the changing times with wisdom. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the horses as much as his father did. Rebecca was wild and fearless, always covered in dirt and climbing things she shouldn't. The twins were inseparable troublemakers who drove everyone to distraction and laughter in equal measure. Through it all, Amanda and Xavier's love deepened. The passion of early romance mellowed into something richer and more complex, a partnership built on trust and respect and genuine friendship. They still took walks in the evenings when they could, still held hands under the stars, still found joy in each other's company after the children were asleep. They had hard years too. There was a drought in 1886 that nearly broke them, and they lost a quarter of their herd. Rebecca had a serious illness when she was 4 that terrified them both, bringing back memories of lost children, but they weathered every storm together, leaning on each other and their extended family. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Xavier took Amanda back to the rock outcropping where he'd first kissed her. They left the children with Martha and Alice for the night and rode out to their special place. They were older now, Xavier's hair showing threads of silver, Amanda's face marked with laugh lines and the signs of bearing 4 children. But when Xavier looked at her in the dying light of the sunset, his eyes held the same love and wonder they had that first evening. 10 years, Xavier said, holding her close. 10 years since you walked into my bunkhouse and made me smile again. 10 years of being happier than I ever thought possible. We've built a good life, Amanda said, leaning into his warmth. A family, a home, a legacy. Thomas and Rebecca would be proud of us, I think. Your Rebecca and Jacob, my Thomas. They'd be happy that we found each other, that we didn't let grief destroy us. I talk to them sometimes, Xavier admitted. To Rebecca and Jacob. I tell them about our children, about the life we've built. I thank them for the time I had with them, and I tell them I'm sorry I couldn't save them. But I also tell them I'm happy now, that I found love again, and it doesn't diminish what I felt for them. I do the same with Thomas, Amanda said softly. I tell him about you, about how you made me laugh again, how you gave me a family and a future. I think he understands. I think they all do. They made love under the stars that night, their bodies familiar and beloved to each other, and when they returned to the ranch the next morning, Amanda was smiling with a secret. Within a few weeks, she'd confirmed she was pregnant again, at 37 years old, with their 5th child. Matthew Xavier Garrett was born in 1890, a surprise late-in-life baby who became utterly spoiled by his older siblings and the entire ranch community. He was a happy, easy child, and Xavier joked that he was their reward for surviving the twins. As the century turned and Arizona Territory moved towards statehood, the Garrett Ranch stood as a testament to what could be built from grief and second chances. Thomas, their oldest, was training to take over the ranch operations eventually, learning everything his father could teach him. Rebecca had announced she wanted to be a veterinarian, shocking everyone and making her parents immensely proud. The twins were still trying to figure out who they wanted to be, but they were good boys at heart under all the mischief. And little Matthew toddled around the ranch like he owned it, charming everyone he met. Amanda and Xavier, now in their 40s, watched their children grow and marveled at the life they'd created. The grief they'd carried never fully disappeared, but it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet memory rather than an open wound. They'd learned that you could honor the past while fully embracing the present, that second chances were precious and real, that love could bloom even in the hardest soil. On a warm evening in June of 1895, 17 years after that first supper, where Xavier had smiled for the first time, the extended family gathered for a celebration. Thomas, now 15, had won a significant horse competition in Phoenix, and they were toasting his success. Alice and Robert were there with their 2 children. Martha, now in her 70s but still spry, presided over the gathering like the matriarch she was. The ranch hands past and present had been invited, and the Garrett ranch house was full to bursting with people and laughter and love. Amanda stood on the porch, watching the celebration through the window, when Xavier came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. She leaned back into him, comfortable and content. "What are you thinking?" Xavier asked, his voice soft near her ear. "I'm thinking about how far we've come," Amanda said. "From 2 broken, grieving people who could barely make it through each day to this. A house full of family and friends, children who are healthy and happy, a ranch that prospers. We did this, Xavier. We built this together. I couldn't have done it without you," Xavier said. He turned her in his arms so he could see her face. At 43, Amanda was more beautiful to him than she'd been at 26. Time and life had marked her, but every line on her face told a story he treasured. "You were my second chance, Amanda. You made me believe in the future again." "And you were mine," Amanda said. She reached up to cup his face, her thumb stroking his cheek. "I love you, Xavier Garrett. I loved you that first night when you smiled at me over the breadbasket, and I love you more with every day that passes." Xavier kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise, and Amanda kissed him back with all the love in her heart. Around them, the desert evening settled into night, stars emerging one by one in the vast Arizona sky. Inside the house, their children and friends celebrated, and the future stretched ahead full of possibility. They'd both been widowed, both lost everything, both believed they'd never feel joy again. But they'd found each other across a supper table in a bunkhouse, and that moment had changed everything. Xavier had smiled for the first time in 4 years, and that smile had been the beginning of healing, of hope, of love reborn. The years continued to unfold with grace and purpose. The Garrett children grew into remarkable adults who carried forward the values their parents had instilled. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from Flagstaff in 1900 and brought her to live on the ranch, beginning the next generation. Rebecca defied convention and went to veterinary school in California, becoming one of the few female veterinarians in the West. She eventually returned to Arizona and established a practice that served ranchers throughout the territory. The twins, James and Samuel, proved to have their father's gift with horses and became renowned trainers. Matthew, the baby, showed an early talent for drawing and painting, capturing the desert landscape with an artist's eye. Amanda and Xavier aged gracefully together, their love a constant through all the changes life brought. They were the foundation upon which the entire ranch community was built, respected and beloved by everyone who knew them. They'd taught their children that grief was not something to be feared or hidden, but something to be honored and worked through. They had shown them that second chances were real, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that building a life worth living was the best revenge against tragedy. In 1912, when Arizona finally achieved statehood, the Garrett Ranch hosted a massive celebration. Xavier was 64 and Amanda was 60, both gray-haired now, but still vital and engaged with life. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, 3 generations of family that existed because 2 broken people had chosen to heal together. That night, after the celebration had wound down and most of the guests had left, Amanda and Xavier sat on their porch, as they had countless times over the years. The desert was quiet, the stars brilliant, and Amanda rested her head on Xavier's shoulder with a contented sigh. "We made it," she said softly. "We survived everything life threw at us and built something lasting." "We did," Xavier agreed. His arm was around her shoulders, holding her close. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that I got to have this life with you, this family, this future. After Rebecca and Jacob died, I thought my life was over. But it was just beginning. I just didn't know it yet." "That first smile," Amanda said, remembering. "When you passed me the bread at supper that first night, that was the moment I knew there was still life in both of us. Still hope. We just needed to find it together." 2 widows sat at my table at supper," Xavier said, a nostalgic smile on his face, "and one of them became my whole world. The cowboy passed the bread and smiled for the first time in 4 years, and that smile changed everything. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the sounds of their grandchildren playing in the yard, feeling the weight of the life they'd built together. It hadn't been easy. There had been grief and fear and moments of doubt, but they had chosen each other every day, chosen love over fear, chosen to build rather than remain broken. Xavier and Amanda lived well into their 80s, surrounded by family and love until the end. Xavier passed first, in his sleep, in 1928, at the age of 80. Amanda mourned him deeply but with gratitude for the 50 years they had shared. She lived another 3 years, dying peacefully in 1931 with her children and grandchildren around her. They were buried side by side on the ranch they had built together, on a hillside overlooking the valley. The headstone read simply, Xavier and Amanda Garrett, two broken hearts made whole, forever together. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through their descendants, a living testament to the power of second chances and the healing grace of love. And every generation heard the story of how it all began, with two widows sitting at a grieving cowboy's table and a smile shared over a basket of bread that changed 3 lives forever. The wild Arizona desert had witnessed their grief and their healing, their courtship and their marriage, the building of their family and the living of their lives. It had been harsh and beautiful, unforgiving and generous, just like life itself. And through it all, Xavier and Amanda had held fast to each other and to hope, proving that even the deepest sorrow could be transformed into joy, that endings could become beginnings, and that love, when given a second chance, could bloom more beautifully than ever before.